Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, you're coming through nice and loud as well. Thank you very much for taking my call this afternoon. Just to let you know, this is a pre-recorded conversation, and it's pretty casual. So I have got the camera running, and I just want to say thank you very much for agreeing to chat to me. I've been trying to track you down for an awfully long time.
Should have emailed the website, dear.
Do you know?
That's how everybody else does it.
Do you know, I actually have emailed you once before and I got absolutely no response, but that was about 2 years ago.
Oh, well, sometimes, like when I'm on the road like that, our internet connections aren't good, and there was one time there we lost a whole bunch of emails. When you're on the road, shit happens. I'm sorry about that, dear.
No, it's fine. I'm just so pleased to finally got a hold of you. I just wanted to say I'm absolutely thrilled to finally got a hold of you. I live in the Netherlands, and of course, we have semi-tolerant cannabis laws here, and I really wanted to talk to you about your work and a little bit about your journey and this information you're communicating and sort of how you came to be here.
Yeah, well, that's no problem.
Okay.
How I came to be here is because the world is so damn corrupted. There should be no laws against cannabis whatsoever. There never should have been. But, this is what they've done to us, and, literally they've taken the most medicinal plant in the world and villainized it, and they took its use out of medicine, which I think is totally insane. Considering that, in reality, this is the only plant that can save us. We needed to detoxify the planet. We needed to heal ourselves. We needed to create jobs, energy. Over 50,000 different things can be built from this plant. Put people back on the land where they belong. And switch all these hemp-based, or all these industries we have today. Most of them could be switched over into hemp-based industries, which are much more, earth-friendly. I'm sorry I'm talking a little off because I'm still getting over that dental work I had done.
Oh, bless. No worries. I didn't even notice it.
Okay. No, it's just it's a totally messed up world we're living in, and we've gone down the wrong path for so long now. If you look at man's history, it's just a nightmare. We've never done anything right. The only thing we ever got good at or better at was killing each other. And, I look at today, with all the natural disasters that can happen on this planet, super volcanoes, asteroids, God knows what else, tidal waves, I think we have enough problems without worrying about our fellow man killing us. And that's exactly what's happening today. I think there's this yin and yang, you know what I mean about you see that picture of the ball with the black and white.
Yes, of course.
Well, when it's about half and half, I think we're more or less running right. But when you get down to just a little wee spot of white on the ball, that's about where we're at right now.
Yeah. So
we got to get, the thinkers on this planet and people that are a bit more enlightened, to get involved and to change the path we're on. Because if we don't, in a very short time, we're going to go extinct. We can't keep poisoning the planet the way we have been and get away with it. We're not created to live in a poison environment, and neither are our children. So, we need this change in the worst way. And these governments worldwide are all dragging their feet, because they have their little laws in place, and they don't want to go against the UN convention and all the rest of that trash. But, the bottom line is, the UN, all our governments, they're all controlled by the big money. They're not working for us, for God's sakes. If they were, they never would have outlawed cannabis in the first place. So, I look at everything that they're doing as being destructive, and what we're hoping to do is simply wake up enough people to make the change, because we need it desperately. And medicine today, they don't offer us anything. You get sick or you get cancer, well, come in and take your chemo and radiation. That's going to do you a lot of good. It's lunacy what they're doing. And doctors are all breaking their Hippocratic oath. They swear that solemn oath when they become doctors. And the first thing it says, first do no harm. Well, what do doctors do when they first get their license? They start passing out liver toxic, poison chemicals to us, and they call that medicine. Well, I call it more like murder. These people are nothing more than drug dealers for the pharmaceutical industry. And I want to see the pharmaceutical industry abolished. What I see there, what they've done over, for the last 100, 150 years, it's really beyond disgusting. Because they go on today like, We have to keep cannabis illegal, and we're trying to take the high out of it so we can use it for medicine. I mean, that's about the lamest excuse I ever heard. The pharmaceutical industry don't worry about all the opiates, the Oxycontins and Vioxx and all that other crap they throw at us, do they? And they don't worry about that. And this whole thing about synthesizing the cannabinoids, well, that makes them patentable. So that's what they're after. We want to patent this, and then we can make all the money. When in reality, there's a God-given plant right before us that anybody can grow, and basically, the way I showed the world how to do it, basically anybody can make their own medicine and cure their cancers and pretty well every other disease. Because that's what I've seen with this substance. It works on everything, and it replaces basically the vast majority. When I say vast majority, I mean 90 some odd percent, probably 97, 98% of pharmaceuticals are not even needed if you have that oil around.
For sure. Okay, so you're talking about toxic environments. Obviously, you were quite ill, so let's talk a bit about your illness.
Well, I suffered a head injury in 1997. They called it took me almost a year before I got a diagnosis. They call it post-concussion syndrome. People that have head injuries, often they wind up with migraine, headaches, and that type of thing. Well, in my case, I wound up with basically migraine noise. I had this, severe ringing in my head 24 hours a day, and sometimes it gets unbearably loud. So the only thing I've ever found, I took their pharmaceuticals for 5 years, and they just about killed me.
Wow.
At the end of that 5 years, I had a hard time remembering my own name. It was that bad. But, I tried to do everything legally. I seen an episode of The Nature of Things with Dr. David Suzuki in 1998, about a year after I was injured. And it showed all these people smoking cannabis, for their medical problems, and they were having great results. So I went out and I got some cannabis. I'd smoked it in the past anyway, but I had never looked at it like medicine. And when I started using it, it was better than anything that they had given me. So I went back to the doctors. I asked them for they all said the same thing when I asked for a prescription. It's still under study, and it's bad for the lungs. What a pile of nonsense that was. But, I was in a desperate situation because with an injury like mine, with all this noise, it makes it so you can't sleep. And it drives your blood pressure crazy. I was having balance issues. I had a lot of balance problems. And all the chemicals they gave me just made it worse. So, I was looking for a rational solution. So, smoking pot, it actually did give me more rest than anything the pharmaceutical industry was supplying. And it made me feel better. But still, it didn't have the punch that I needed to get a full night's sleep. You see, with this loud noise, what would happen? You go to sleep. Really, I wasn't going to sleep. I was passing out from exhaustion. And I'd pass out for an hour, hour and a half, and then the noise would wake me back up, for another 2 or 3 hours or 4 hours, and then I'd pass out again. So this went on and on and on. And then in 1999, I went into my doctor's office and I asked him point blank, I said, you won't give me a prescription for cannabis so I can smoke it, but I said, what would you think if I took that plant and instead of smoking it, what if I made the essential oil from that plant and ingested it? Well, the doctor got a real weird look on his face, but he did admit, he said that would be a much more medicinal way of using this plant. But still, he wouldn't give me a prescription. And then in I think it was around the end of 2001, they called me down to his office, and the doctor just looked at me and said, well, we've given you everything we have, and nothing has helped you, so you're on your own. Well, thank you. Thank you for all the help. Like I said, at that time, I couldn't even think straight. So I didn't really have anywhere to turn, and I had produced some of this oil, just as something to fall back on. But to be honest, dear, I was afraid to use it, because I had no medical knowledge of what this could do, other than I knew it would help me sleep, but I didn't know what else it would do. So once the medical system basically threw me out, I didn't want to break laws, so I tried to contact the chronic pain center in Halifax, hoping I could get an appointment with them, because I was told that you can get a prescription through them so you can acquire the cannabis legally. And when I called the chronic pain center in Halifax, it was like, well, we have a 2-year waiting period. Well, that does somebody like me a hell of a lot of good now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So I just said, never, to heck with the system. I'm going to do this my way. So I started ingesting that oil, and in a very short time, what I was noticing, I started sleeping very well, like 8, 10, 12 hours a night. And when I get up in the morning, I felt refreshed. My balance issues, they started to go away, and it controlled my blood pressure, which was very helpful. And it just made it so I could live with the condition. So, I can't say that the oil did me any harm whatsoever. But, when in the beginning, I used to go around 185, 190 pounds. And I started seeing all this weight coming off me. And that scared me because, I thought, this stuff must be hurting me. Although I was sleeping well, the weight continued to drop off me. So I thought to myself, I said, well, I'll take it until I get down to 150 pounds. And if I just keep losing weight, then I'm going to stop taking it. But when I got down to about 160, all of a sudden, I stopped losing weight. And I basically just more or less stayed there ever since. So it truly worked miracles. And then in late 2002, I'd had these 3 areas on my body, one close to my nose, or on my nose close to my right eye, and I had one on my cheek and one on my chest. And these lesions wouldn't heal. I'd had the damn things for years, and I strongly suspected that they were skin cancer. So when I went to my doctor's office, he looked it over, and he was more concerned about the one that was close to my eye. So he said, we'll send you in and get rid of that one first, and then we'll deal with the other 2 areas later. So I went in, it was around the end of January 2003, I went in and I had the one next to my eye surgically removed. And it was about a week after the surgery was performed, I was looking at the area where they had operated, and it was a pretty ugly mess. So just all of a sudden, this report I'd heard back in the mid-70s, see, my cousin had died from cancer at 25 years old in 1972. And it was horrible watching him die. And cancer was very rare then. So, but it was about 3 years later that, I worked at a hospital, the All Saints Hospital in Spring Hill. And I was leaving work about 3 years after he passed away, and then this report come on the radio. THC, the active ingredient in marijuana, has been found to kill cancer cells. So, I was thinking, well, maybe this works. But it bothered me because I had the oil right there, and at that time I'd been ingesting it then for close to around a year. And I thought if this actually worked, then why hadn't it cured my cancers? So, I didn't understand much about the body then. I've come to learn a lot more since that time. But, our skin is the biggest organ we have on our bodies. And, basically, once skin cancer, establishes itself, it likes to go in and spread. Well, in my case, these cancers, even though I was taking the THC internally, these cancers, they were just little spots, but I wasn't taking enough THC to actually get rid of it. So I almost didn't, I'm ashamed to say, I almost didn't do it. Because I thought, it should have worked. But then I've always been a bit of a doting Thomas anyway, so I went down to the bathroom and I took a little bit of oil and I put it on the other 2 lesions. And I didn't really feel anything. The only thing I noticed, when you have basal cell carcinoma, it feels like you have splinters in the affected area, and it'll puff up and bleed and things like that. But the minute I put the oil on it, that splinter feeling went away. But there was nothing else. So I left the bandages in place for 4 days. And then I went down to the bathroom, and when I removed the bandages, all it was there was pink skin. So I went out and I started telling, friends and neighbors, what I had done. And I told them, I said, I think this stuff cured my cancer. And, unfortunately, everybody just laughed at me. Yeah, sure, Rick, marijuana cures cancer. They didn't take it seriously at all. But about 7 weeks later, the one they had surgically removed, it came right back. Excuse me, dear.
No worries, take your time.
And it came right back, so I went in and I watched it develop. The splinter feeling was there, and the bleeding and the puffiness. So I just put a little dab of oil on it, put a bandage on. 4 days later, I removed the bandage, and it was completely healed. Now, that's over 10 years ago, and I've never retreated them. Wow. So I was just amazed with it, and then I went down to my doctor's office to get a copy of my pathology report from the operation they had performed. And sure enough, when I read the pathology report, it said, basal cell carcinoma, totally excised. Yeah, right. Because 7 weeks later it was back, so they didn't get it all. But, you would think, the doctor's assistant, or his receptionist, was actually his wife. And so I said to her, I'd like to come back in the evening and have a talk to the doctor about something I've been working on. And she said, well, what's this about? And I said, well, that cancer they surgically removed, it came right back. So I cured it and the other 2 areas with hemp oil. And the minute I said hemp oil, that woman went ballistic. I was standing in my doctor's waiting room. There were 5 or 6 other patients were right there. And this woman started shouting at me, the doctor will not go there. The doctor will not prescribe this. And I was thinking, what the hell is this? If I was a doctor and one of my patients came in and said that he had cured his skin cancer, I think I'd want to know what he used. So it kind of made, it had a bad smell about it. So after I went home that day, and I remember it was about 40 miles to where the doctor lives from where I live, and it was somewhat like being in the Twilight Zone. What the hell is real? But when I got home, I started supplying the oil to my mother and other people I knew that were having problems with skin conditions. My mother had weeping psoriasis on her foot that had been giving her a bad time, and we used the oil, and no time, it healed it. And then it started healing everything. And then within about a year, I started supplying it to people, with internal conditions like cancer and things like that, and it was just amazing what it was doing. But in 2003, when I started passing the oil out, I started contacting all the political parties in Canada. I went to 2 federal ministers of health. I went to Dr. David Suzuki. We went everywhere you could think. These news and information shows like W5, The Fifth Estate, Marketplace. We went to these shows. They wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. We went to the Canadian Cancer Society, and all they said is, we do not support the use of dietary supplements, whatever that means. That's a pathetic organization. Well, all this cancer, it's just anybody that donates money to these people, you might as well take it out and burn it, because they're just stealing your money is all they're doing. But in the beginning, I thought somebody would do something about this, so we even took our case to the United Nations, and nobody would lift a finger. So I just kept treating people, and I watched one miracle after another occur, and I just thought sooner or later, this system has to sober up. You can't deny this type of reality. When you have all these patients, I did what I did. I did it all openly. I didn't hide anything. What I was doing, I was growing the plants, I was producing the medicine from the plants, and I was giving the medicine away for nothing. So, is that a crime to help your fellow man and save their lives? Well, in Canada it is. Because, in 2005, we had some meetings at the Macan Legion. These meetings were videotaped, and it showed patients who had used the oil. And I took copies of this video right into the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Detachment right in Amherst. I took it in. I told them, I said, we have politicians around here that are basically guilty of criminal negligence causing death because they're not doing their jobs. They're not representing people. And I gave them the videotape and everything. And I also asked the police for everything they confiscated so I could make more medicine to give to the people. 3 months later, I never heard another word from them. Then 3 months later, the same detachment comes and raids me. I had 1,620 plants in my backyard in 2005. They charged me with possession, cultivation, and trafficking.
Oh.
Oh yeah, great country, Canada. If you like police states, it's a good place to live. But, again, I went into the court system. I took a videotape in. We even videotaped me taking all this information right into the RCMP. So I gave the Crown Prosecutor and the local reporter for the Chronicle Herald, I gave them both a copy of this tape. And it showed the patients, it showed me taking the videos in to all this information in the RCMP. And I looked at the Crown Prosecutor and I said to him, look, this does not belong in a court of law, and you know it. But, they wouldn't back off. They had to go on along with their little witch hunt. So they, the time they played their court game, the following year, it was late 2006, before we decided to mount a charter challenge. So in late 2006 that took place, but also in 2006 I put another 1,100 clones in my backyard, and again the RCMP come in and raided me again. This time they didn't even have a search warrant. They just said, we're with the marijuana eradication program. And I just looked at them and said, yeah, you're here to steal the cure for cancer again. Congratulations, you're doing a wonderful job, for the Canadian people. But I went through the charter challenge. I presented 48 sworn affidavits, and of course there was all my medical, records and everything there. And the judge got right up and stated, after it was over, he said he found the affidavits to be anecdotal, and he said that I didn't present any life-threatening conditions. So according to this judge, post-concussion syndrome is not life-threatening. Also, skin cancer is not life-threatening. I mean, it was so idiotic, the statements that man made. I couldn't believe it. And I went back to the court and I asked them for a transcription, because it's like I said, anybody who would listen to it would know. I mean, this judge had to be mad. And so they gave me back a video or an audio cassettes. But what the judge had said wasn't there. They were protecting the judge. So then they called me back into court and they said, well, you could appeal your charter challenge. Well, right under the Charter of Rights in Canada, it says we have the right to life. But what I found out about Canada is you have the right to life as long as you're willing to use their poisons and trash. But if you want to use a natural medication to heal yourself, well, forget your right to life. And that's the way it went. And so when they asked me about, appealing this charter challenge, I said, no, the thing to do now, I said, let's put this before a jury in the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. So they finally, in the fall of 2007, the court case started. And, of course, they brought all of their RCMP in as witnesses and, talking about their brave exploits in my backyard. But in the end, every RCMP officer that they had testify against me wound up testifying for me. Because I'd gone to the newspapers like a year before I was ever charged. And they did Spring Hill Record did a full-page article detailing a picture of me, detailing everything that I was doing. But for like a year, nobody came near me. So when these officers were on the stand, I held up a copy of this newspaper. And I said, would a criminal go to a newspaper and have them do full-page articles about what he was doing? And, of course, they had to admit, no, a criminal wouldn't do that. And then I asked them, I said, now what about all this evidence I took to the RCMP in May of 2005? Well, we know of this videotape, but we've never seen it. And I said, is it common practice for the RCMP not to look at evidence? And these officers, they just got this stupid look in their face and they wouldn't answer. And of course the judge should have forced them to do that, but he wouldn't. So, at the end of their case, they did bring a marijuana expert on, the RCMP's marijuana expert, and I made a total fool of him because, the man didn't know a thing about the subject. And it didn't take me long to prove it. So their part of the case was over, and then I was supposed to start my defense. Well, I had 10 patients there ready to testify. Some of them had been cured with terminal cancer. And I had 6 doctors also there to testify. So the judge asked me, he said, what are your intentions? And I said, I'm going to put the patient on the stand and let them tell the jury what the oil had done for them. And then I'm going to put their doctor on the stand. And that way, he can't lie. And, the judge, he said, well, I don't think I can allow any of this. And, it was getting ugly in that courtroom. And I was getting good and mad, and he knew it. So he said, well, we'll let it go overnight. We'll talk about this in the morning. So the next morning I came back, he stated that, no, this had no bearing on my case. The very people whose lives I had saved had no bearing on my case whatsoever, according to him. So, I was disgusted with that. As a matter of fact, I told that judge at one point during the trial, I told him, I said, before this is over, you're the one that's going to be going to jail. And I remember at one point, the defense there, they said they come up with something outrageous. And I come right out of my chair, and the judge looked at me and he said, Mr. Simpson, you can't take this personally. And I looked at him and I said, look, those raids that the RCMP conducted on my property cost a great number of people their lives. Do I take that personally? You're damn right I do. And his head dropped. He couldn't look me in the face. So, it was a kangaroo court the whole way through, but in the end, I was the only one that was allowed to testify on my own behalf. So I spent about 2 hours on the stand. There's 12 jurors on that jury, and the funny part of it is, there was 1 or 2 of them on that jury that I had treated family members of their own families and cured them. So I didn't think there was a hope in hell that they would ever find me guilty of anything. But all of a sudden, when the case was over, the jury retired. 3 hours later, we're called back to the courtroom. I go into the courtroom expecting, a not guilty verdict. And when I walked in, well, the prosecutor from the Justice Department, Monica McQueen, she was there. But Doug Shatford, the Crown prosecutor, wasn't present. Now, I thought that was strange, so 2 or 3 minutes later, Shatford entered the courtroom, and then a couple minutes later, in come the jury. Well, when I stood up, I couldn't believe it. It was like guilty, guilty, guilty. And I'm standing there looking at these people and thinking, guilty of what? Healing? Is that against the law? I didn't know this. I couldn't believe it. And then I turned to the judge right there and I told him, I said, you better lock me up right now, pal. Because I said, the minute I go home, I'm going to keep distributing that medicine. The judge didn't lock me up. They put it off for the sentencing and all this nonsense. And, what had happened, the very next day, one of the people in the audience contacted me. And, and ordinary people don't know how court procedures work they don't know much about it. But this lady contacted me and said that she had seen the Crown prosecutor leaving the jury room just a couple minutes before the jury came in. And I couldn't believe it at first. And then I told her, I said, go back to the courtroom, sit in the same chair that you were sitting in, and make sure what room he came out of. So this lady went back to the court. She told them, she sat in the same chair. She looked down the hall, and the only doorway that was visible was a jury room door. So we contacted the judge and everything, and we thought he would do something about it. And then a couple weeks later, they contacted us to come to the court. Well, I thought it was just a meeting, but when we went to the court, here was this the two prosecutors were there. With some pasty-faced lawyer from Halifax representing them, and Cashillon, the judge, he was sitting behind the bench. And the minute we walked into the courtroom with this woman, the judge came right up and he said, I hope you understand. Her name was Margaret Dwyer. He said, I hope you understand, Mrs. Dwyer, that if we find anything that you're saying to be untrue, that you could be facing 14 years in jail. And Margaret Dwyer is she's like a rock. And Margaret just looked at the judge and she said, I simply came here to tell the truth. So she took the stand, and this lawyer, he tried to destroy what she was saying, and he couldn't do it. This one, they had her on the stand for about 20 minutes, and he came at her in every different direction, and she just laughed at him. As a matter of fact, at one point, he even said, I think you're doing this just so you won't lose your supplier. And Margaret Dwyer sat there and just laughed at him. She said, do you think Rick Simpson is the only grower in Nova Scotia or Canada? There's people all over the place growing this plant. I don't need Rick to supply me. So they couldn't do a thing with her. But then through a couple of the dealers that I'd met, they had told me that they had sold hemp or cannabis to the Crown prosecutor. Oh. So it was my turn then, so I called Doug Shatford to the stand. And I asked him about his use of hemp. And he got all red in the face, and he started stuttering. And then the judge jumped right in and took right up for him. That line of questioning will not be tolerated. And I said, well, they asked Margaret Dwyer about her use. Now why can't I ask him? And then they brought a couple of flunkies up that worked at the courthouse. And of course, to protect their jobs, they all swore that Mr. Shatford wasn't in the jury room, which was nothing but a pack of lies. As a matter of fact, here, just about a year ago, there was another case involving the oil, and Doug Shatford was caught right in the jury room this time, because one of the jury members went out and reported him. That's what should have happened the first time. And instead, that man should have been instantly disbarred. Instead, they just dismissed the case and they tried to smooth it over, and that idiot is still prosecuting people in Amherst, Nova Scotia, and he's nothing but a criminal.
So what was he doing in the jury room, Rick? What was he actually doing in the jury room then?
Oh, in there to make sure that I was found guilty. Yeah. What else would he be doing in there?
Okay, just to clarify, thank you.
It was pathetic. I couldn't believe it, but when the case was over, I was so disgusted with Canada. I was looking to leave. Like you come home, the case is over, then 10 minutes later there's somebody beating on your door, dying of cancer, they need the oil. So, at first my heart wasn't in it, but I kept supplying the oil. And, after this, I should talk about the sentencing too, because the day I went up to the sentencing, the lawyer I'd had for the charter challenge, he told me himself, he said, Rick, he said, I don't know what's going on here. He said, I've been a lawyer for years, and I can't even explain what these people are doing anymore. He said, you beat them in court, and he said, and they know it. But they did everything they could to make sure you were found guilty. And then when the judge passed down my sentence, I was facing 12 years in jail. And the judge came right out and stated, his first statement was, under different circumstances, Mr. Simpson would be winning awards for his work. But this is a court of law, and no awards are given out here. And then he came out and he stated, in my 34 years in the legal system, I've never seen a case like this. There was no criminal intent. So what the hell was I doing in his court? He knew there was no criminal intent. The Crown prosecutors, both these cross prosecutors knew the truth. So did the judge. And then, although he would not allow the patients to testify, and he would not allow any scientific evidence to be introduced, he came right out and stated. He said the scientific evidence does exist to back up everything Mr. Simpson is saying, plus he has all these patients that also back his position. So what they did, they gave me a $2,000 fine, for saving lives, and a gun restriction. Because if you're charged with trafficking and you're found guilty, it doesn't make any difference whether guns were involved or not. If you're found guilty, an automatic gun restriction goes with it. So that was my, punishment. So, I was really disturbed with Canada. It was about 3 months after the sentencing. I remember I was talking to my son about moving to South America, and he started laughing at me. And I looked at him and I said, what's so funny? And he said, I guess you are, Dad. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, Dad, you're not going anywhere. He said, you're going to stay here and fight these people. He said, I know you. You're not going to walk away from this. And it made me laugh then, and that kind of brought me back to normal. So really, for the next year and a half, they basically left me alone. They stayed away from me. I openly grew hemp again in 2009, right in my backyard. I announced what I was doing on a very popular maritime radio show. So every cop in the Maritimes knew it was there, but nobody came near. And then October 2009, I went to the Czech Republic and I did a speaking tour with Dr. Lemir Hanush. He's one of the top experts in this field. It was a very successful speaking tour. And then I returned to Canada, and the High Times magazine wanted me to go to the Cannabis Cup to do a seminar, and they wanted to present me with Freedom Fighter of the Year. So I guess it was about the 20th of November, I flew to Amsterdam, and I did my seminar and everything, and about the day before the event ended, they made me Freedom Fighter on the last day of the event. So the day before it ended, I got word from my son back in Canada that the RCMP had come back into raided my house again, kicked the doors in, their usual routine. They're just like a bunch of spoiled kids. Throw them in somebody's house and let them tear the house all apart, because that's what they do. And so I was really disgusted with the whole thing, and I knew what they were doing because there was no guns. They were saying that they found 70 pounds of pot, restricted weapons, booby traps. The RCMP had raided me 3 times previously. They never found any guns, any booby traps, nothing of that nature. So, what they were trying to do was, they were trying to keep me out of Canada. What was happening, you see, here in Canada, I was getting a lot of support, and it was building all the time. And it was a real thorn in the government's side. So I think they sent the RCMP in there, lay these false charges, and that way, because I'd already been through the court system, and I knew how corrupt it was. And I knew it would be pointless to go back to Canada. So I think the idea was to keep me out of Canada. So at the time, I realized that, in 2009, that I needed more time for people to become aware of the truth. And I had to write the book on this subject to bring that truth out. Well, in July of 2012, I released Phoenix Tears, the Rick Simpson story. It's available as an ebook on our website at phoenixtears.ca. And I named everybody. I told it was just all truth. It's all on the public record anyway. So now the truth is exposed. And, and the stupidest thing the government could have done was to maroon me in Europe. Because, I mean, what did they think I was going to do? Well, that I was going to stay in Europe and keep my mouth shut? Not a hope in hell. So I started doing more, seminars. I've been on national television in Croatia a couple times, like for hour-long interviews. I've done seminars at the World Hemp Congress in Slovenia. I did several seminars in Croatia and more in the Czech Republic. And I was doing a lot of traveling. But, finally, as time went on, and more people began, because, in 2004, we put the website up, and we told the whole world how to heal themselves. Simply grow these plants. We told them what type to use, and how to make the medicine properly, how to, do your dosages properly. So the information was all out there, and then many people started acting on it. And then when it got up in around 2009, 2010, there was more and more of these video testimonials coming up on YouTube, on the internet. And the numbers just kept going. And today, I mean, I don't know how many are up there now. There's all kinds of, people with all various illnesses that, have told the public openly, what this medicine has done for them. But, so I guess it was last May, the Canadian, or the legal system here withdrew their charges against me. And so last summer I came home for about 6 weeks, and then I returned to do some more seminars in Europe. And after I was done in Europe, I came back in I think it was around the 18th of November last year. And I've been in Canada ever since, but I'm not planning to stay here. I'm going back to Europe within about a month. I'm getting some dental work done now. As soon as I get that completed, I'm going back to Europe because the honest truth is I don't want to live in this country anymore. I'm disgusted with it. My father fought in Normandy, for freedom and democracy and all the rest of that nonsense. And, I mean, these old war veterans like my dad, if they knew what the Canadian government was doing, they would roll over in their graves. When I look at North America, United States and Canada, and many other countries, they're simply fascist states. They're worse than anything we fought in the Second World War. And when you look at the number of people that they have killed simply by denying the medicinal use of this plant, it's horrendous. I mean, just here in Canada alone, over 70,000 people are dying every year from cancer. Now, I'm not saying that we could have saved them all, but we could have saved a very, very high percentage of them. And then when you do the math, it was 2003 when I went to the government. Well, that's 10 years ago. Now multiply that 70,000 by 10. You've got 700,000 that have died from cancer. And that's just one disease that this medicine works miracles for. So who's responsible? I think it has to be our government. Well, I know it's the Canadian government for sure since 2003, but the American government have also known since the mid-70s that this was an effective treatment, but they didn't bring it out. And now in 2003, the American government, just after I started making all that noise, the American government went out and put medicinal patents in place on this plant. The same plant they say has no medicinal value. Talk about a corrupted world. But it's changing now so quickly, and people are waking up. I mean, hundreds of thousands, if not millions now, worldwide, have used this medicine and produced it. So now it's not just me anymore. There's thousands of us. And, they've seen the results. And we know what this medicine can do. But you still get all these people standing there, I trust my doctor. Well, anybody who trusts their doctor has got a hole in their head. I don't know why people put so much trust in doctors. I mean, we don't trust our mechanics. We don't trust anybody. But yet you put that guy in the white coat in front of us, and whatever the doctor says, we'll do. And, I mean, it's just totally pathetic. So, I tried to do this thing in the right way in the beginning because, even back in 2003, I seen what was going on. And I understood, the corruption. And this is what the governments were so afraid of, because if I come out with this, it would expose them for what they've been doing. And but I thought, if we could work together, that we could bring this to the public in a rational way and then spread it, worldwide. But instead, of doing the right thing, they persecuted me. And now they're going to have to pay the price for that. Because basically, well, there's a good portion of the world already knows the story, but in no time, I think the whole world is going to know what happened here. Because we're all looking for answers. We're looking for cures, to protect our children and our loved ones. And it's these governments that are causing all the grief. And, when you go back, it really always goes back to the big money, the big banking families, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. They're the ones that are guilty. I mean, these people are psychopaths. It's almost like they're addicted to all this power and money, just like a drug addict. And, I mean, they go in, they buy up the political parties. Of course, we don't know this, but that's what happens. They buy up there, like here in Canada, we got the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Green Party. Well, I've been to them all. None of them would lift a finger. So obviously, they're not working for the people. So, I mean, it doesn't matter what government gets in. You're going to get the same thing. They're not going to help you. So what I'm telling people to do right now is, get off your Chesterfields. And, I get this all the time. We stand behind you, Rick. Well, the hell with standing behind me. Stand beside me. And get up and let's put a change to this. Let's make the changes that are necessary because, we have to protect our loved ones. We have to protect our children. And we have to detoxify this planet. And we have to start living in a rational way again. Instead of all this Fukushimas and Gulf oil spills and all the other horrible things they're doing to our world. This is a time for rational thinking and logic. And our governments are not exhibiting it.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. So you've had such an incredible journey. And you know what? I really admire the information that you're putting out. Can I ask you just a few things on a very basic level? And the most commonly asked questions about cannabis. First off, how do you make the basic essential oil? I went out, let me tell you what I did. I went out to a health store and I bought hemp seed oil. I think it was hemp oil. And it's not the same thing. So I want to know how to make the basic oil.
Well, the oil itself, the real medicinal value in the hemp plant is in the resins. And these high-quality strains of hemp, well, they call it marijuana or ganja today, but these high-quality strains, you'll see it right on the buds and on the leaves. You'll see the resin. It almost looks like they're covered in frost.
Crystal.
It's the resin. So what you're doing, literally, what I'm doing is taking a solvent, I'm taking the dry bud material, I'm putting it in a bucket, I'm dampening it with solvent, and then I crush the bud material up with a stick, the same as I showed on the video. And what you're literally doing is you're washing the resins off the plant material, and then you filter it. You filter the oil solvent mixed, like through a coffee filter, and then you simply take the oil solvent mix, after the plant debris and things have been taken out of it. You simply take that, put it in a rice cooker, put a fan behind it, and then you boil the solvent off it. And the instructions are all there. Like we also released a video or a documentary in early 2008 called Run From the Cure. And it shows how to produce the medicine, right in our documentary. Plus there's all kinds of information up there now. And like I said, people are doing it worldwide. But, once you boil the solvent off, really what you're left with, it's like the oil is not a runny, it's runny when it's hot. But when it goes down to room temperature, it has the consistency of a thick grease. Mm. So, and the way we showed everybody how to do it, take a rice cooker. Well, if you've got a pound of good hemp, well, if you've got cancer and you've got a pound of good, indica bud, like the heavy sedative varieties that I use, if you've got a pound of good bud, a couple of gallons of solvent, and a rice cooker, you can make your own cure for cancer. But, please follow the safety instructions. Make sure it's in a well-ventilated area. Put a fan behind the rice cooker to carry the fumes away. I've made the oil thousands of times that way with no mishaps. So, it is safe to do if you do it properly. But some people will take the rice cooker and put it in their basement and then fill their basement full of fumes, and all of a sudden they light a cigarette and the whole thing goes boom. I didn't count on the raw stupidity that many people exhibit. And there's quite a few people that have burnt themselves needlessly. But the way I look at this whole process, it should be done with distilling equipment. Because at one point I did have my own still, and I used to produce the oil in the still and boil off the solvent and reclaim it. And this was so safe. You could literally sit there and smoke a cigarette right beside it. There was no fumes, there was no danger whatsoever. So there are very, very safe ways that this can be mass-produced on a giant scale. And if we could get rid of these absurd laws against this plant, These marijuana prices today are just insane. Like in some of these places in California and whatnot, they want, like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a pound. I mean, cannabis is just an herb. It's no different than, like if you had a field of corn, I'd say you had 100 acres of corn. Well, take the field next to it and plant 100 acres of hemp. Now, what's a pound of hemp worth? Well, what's a pound of corn worth? Practically nothing. And hemp would be worth practically nothing if we didn't have these absurd laws in place. And that's where it's bringing the criminal element into it. The governments, they're filling their pockets from the pharmaceutical companies that are, obliging them. It's so pathetic what's going on, and the public have no real idea of what's taking place. But, I mean, it's easy to prove, because all you got to do is go on the internet and, like I said, look at the testimonials. And I'm not in this for the money. I wanted people everywhere on this planet to know how they can heal themselves, because nobody else is telling them, and they're not offering us any answers. So, this oil, it does so many wonderful things. It rejuvenates vital organs. I've never met a cancer yet that it couldn't lick. It's amazing what it does with cancer. But chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, AIDS, so many of these horrible diseases that people are dying everywhere from can be handled. I mean, I've said this right along. You're going to find one of two things. Either the oil is going to cure you, or you're going to find that is by far the best control you will ever find for your condition. And that's what everybody has reported back to me. No harm, no danger, no addiction. That's exactly what medicine should be about. And if doctors were actually following their Hippocratic oath, they would be passing out natural medicines like hemp oil to help people. I'm sorry about that mix-up with the oils, because that these hemp seed oil companies, they've always sold their product under the heading of hemp oil. But if you turn the label to the back, it says cold-pressed hemp seed oil.
Yes.
So really what they're doing is they're mislabeling their product. And I had quite a few of these companies even come after me about this, demanding that I change the name of this oil to marijuana oil or something. And I just told them point blank, I said, look, I'm not changing the name. All through history, this was known as the hemp plant. That's what farmers called it. Now I'm taking the hemp plant and I'm making the essential oil from it, and that's hemp oil. But what you're selling is cold-pressed hemp seed oil, and you are mislabeling your product. It's that simple.
Yeah, okay. Now, just a quick question that's come in from people. What is the solvent that you actually use?
Well, my favorite solvent is ether. I've used ether on a few occasions, and it did a wonderful job. Next to ether, I prefer to use naphtha. In Europe, it's called benzene, or benzene, depending on what country you're in.
Mm-hmm.
And you can also use something like 99% isopropyl alcohol. I mean, I like to use solvents as close as possible to their pure form. 100% pure solvent is the best.
Yeah.
But, a lot of people are trying to produce the oil using what they call Everclear. Well, Everclear is just more alcohol, but usually Everclear is only 90% or 95%, and that other percentage that's left is water. So that makes Everclear a less effective solvent, and at the end of the process, you're left with all this excess water that has to be evaporated off. So my favorite solvent, and the cheapest solvent I found to use, was what's known in North America as naphtha, light naphtha, and it's at a boil at about 150 degrees Fahrenheit. It's boiling quite vigorously. And I tell people, if you're worried about the solvent you're using, simply take the lid off the can, dip your finger in the solvent, hold your finger out in the air. Within 30 to 40 seconds, it should evaporate. All that solvent should evaporate completely. If it doesn't evaporate, if it leaves an oily film, or if it takes a couple minutes to evaporate away, I wouldn't use that solvent. You want something that will evaporate quickly, and usually within 40 seconds, a good solvent will be gone entirely. So it's a relatively easy thing to do. And many people have said, while they're so worried about solvent residues, I've even had people come back and say, they could taste the naphtha in the oil, which is ridiculous. Like the plants vary from strain to strain in their medicinal values. But all these plants have natural terpenes. And these terpenes can have a kind of funny taste to them. And what they're tasting is actually the terpenes of the plant itself. Because my oils have been tested by some of the top experts in the world, and my oils have tested to be the strongest and most potent available anywhere. And they come out, well, actually, the last test we had done, a young fellow in the States, he made oil by my instructions. The oil, when it was tested, was 95.51% THC, 2% CBN, 1.9% CBD, and it was like 0.8 plant wax. A little less than 1% plant wax. There was no solvent residues because, and even if there was a solvent residue left behind in the oil, which there isn't, but even if there was, the oil itself is so anti-poisonous, it would neutralize any harmful effects. Wow. So there's absolutely no danger.
Wow. It's incredible. Now, how much would you recommend people take? Like, say I've got stomach or bowel cancer, for example. A teaspoon a day, or?
It depends on if you've been to the medical system or not.
Oh, right, okay.
I mean, if you've come to me and if you had a serious internal cancer and you've had no chemo, no radiation, none of that nonsense, usually what I tell people, 60 grams over a 3-month period. 60 grams over 90 days, and it's almost a given. If you have an internal cancer, you take that much oil, over 90 days, your cancer is going to be gone.
So is that 60 grams a day or 60 grams over 90 days?
60 grams over 90 days. But don't get me wrong. I mean, it depends on the person's own tolerance. I like to see people start with small doses and work their way up. But I have had people that actually cured their terminal cancers in 1 month because they took the whole damn treatment in 1 month. I mean, this is what you have to realize with this oil. You don't die from its effects. It might put you to sleep for a while, but it's not going to harm you. So there's absolutely no danger.
So basically what you're saying is, if you are pretty damn sick, just take as much as you can and go to sleep.
As quickly as you can, yes. I mean, the idea is to get enough of these cannabinoids in your body to get ahead of the cancer, and then you can beat the cancer back. It's a very simple equation if you think about it. If you don't have the medicine in you, it's not going to work. But when you get people that have been, gone through the system, they've had chemo, they've had radiation, well, individuals like that, the treatment is the same, except instead of taking 60 grams over the 3 months, I would suggest that they try as quickly as possible to get 120 to 180 grams of this high-grade oil into them. And because you've got to undo all of the harmful effects that the chemo and radiation leave behind. And they linger in the body for years. If people only would understand what radiation and this poison, chemo, does to your vital organs, they would understand then, why it's necessary to do this. But the way I look at all of these diseases, the first line of treatment, the first line of defense should be hemp oil. Because in reality, I mean, we all know chemo, radiation, things like that, these are carcinogenic, cancer-causing treatments. And even the ones that go in and have chemo, and I knew a lady right here in Spring Hill a few years ago. I knew the family quite well, and I went to them. I took a copy of our documentary, Run from the Cure, and I tried to tell the husband, get your wife on this oil. Well, of course, she got cancer, and they wouldn't listen, so she went and took chemo. So I was in there a few months later, and his wife was walking around. She said, "Oh, I'm feeling wonderful now, and I'm back." Well, about 3 months later, she was back in hospital again. And guess what? The cancer's back. So I went in and talked to her husband. I told him, I said, get her away from those doctors before they kill her. He wouldn't listen. She's dead.
Shame.
Well, that's that closed-minded thing. We all run around believing, and this is what I believed in the first place, if this really worked, our governments and the medical system would be using it, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
No, they wouldn't, because they don't want it to work. They want to make the big profits out of killing us. And if you know the whole story of what, like, Rockefeller in the States did, I mean, they in the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller and his rich friends, they all got together and they started these medical foundations.
Yeah.
Then these foundations, in turn, took over the medical schools. And all they taught was allopathic medicine. Medicine from chemicals and poisons. Because all Rockefeller's buddies, they're the ones that own these plants. And they wanted a great way to sell their garbage. So if we can convince the public that this is medicine, well, we're going to make a lot of profit. And the weird part about this whole thing, old Rockefeller himself, he wouldn't even go near allopathic medicine because he knew better. What he took was empiric medicine from plants, and he lived to be about 100 years old.
Yeah, for sure.
Nothing but a criminal.
So they've invented all this stuff just to kill us off, basically.
That's the name of the game. And and the public's sitting there in their asses and all their apathy, they're just letting them do it. And I am so frustrated because how do you walk into a cancer ward in a children's hospital and look at these little toddlers in all these stages of dying. How does an oncologist, supposedly a medical professional, how do they get up in the morning and look at themselves in the mirror, knowing that they're going to go into that hospital and poison and kill children? Because that's what they're doing. These people have no soul. There's no empathy. There's no compassion. Most of these doctors simply like playing God. And they're getting damn well paid to do it, aren't they? Yeah,
for sure. That's very sad, actually. I do think that there are doctors out there who genuinely become doctors because they are natural healers, but medicine is the only way they find to express that. And I've come across some very good doctors who've done amazing research. There are few and far between, but sadly, just even the most basic things like good nutrition, they only spend I think it's half a day out of 7 years of medical training teaching nutrition to medical students, which is absolutely insane. They want us to be ill.
Oh yes, I'd agree. I remember back in 2004, not too long after I started passing the medicine out, there was a pharmacist in River Hibbert that wanted to meet me. So I went down to the pharmacy, and she was standing behind the counter up on this pedestal, and she had her arms folded, like kind of looking down her nose at me. And then she, well, what's all this about that oil? And I just looked at her and I said, okay, you're a pharmacist. Tell me something. I said, what's the most medicinal plant in the world? And she looked at me and she said, well, that would be cannabis hemp. And I said, that's right. Now, why isn't it on your shelves? And she said, well, why are you so mad, at the doctors? And I said, because they're the ones that we're putting our trust in and they're killing us, for God's sakes. Well, she said, in medical school, when doctors go through medical school, they have about 3 months of training in medicinal plants. So all this nonsense about doctors not knowing, that's a bald-faced lie. They do know. And pharmacists are taught all through their training the same thing. Cannabis is the most medicinal plant. But yet these pharmacists will go into your local hometown. They live there. They're your friends and neighbors. And all they do is go down there and dispense harmful chemicals and poisons, to their friends, families, and the rest of the people that live in the surrounding area.
Wow.
Because they're just good businessmen, aren't they?
Unreal.
If I was working in any industry where I was harming people, I think I would have to stop and look at it. Because they know. I asked another pharmacist one day, I took a tube of oil into the pharmacy and I said to him, what have you got in this building that even begins to measure up to this oil? And he looked at me and he said, Rick, over half it is just fluff. And I said, yes, and the rest of it's just a bunch of dangerous, addictive, and deadly trash. And he never even made an excuse. He just looked at me and he said, in a world where 9/11 can happen, what do you expect? So there's a man living in a small community of about 3,000 people, literally killing his friends and neighbors. But he's making a good living, so that's okay.
Sure. I find it so hard to believe that these doctors, really, quite literally, Rick, what you're saying to me is these doctors are knowingly participating in the murder of humanity.
Well, they definitely are, dear. They always come back with that same thing. The doctors don't know. Well, here a few years ago, there was a medical convention at McGill University, right here in Canada, in Montreal. It was a convention of oncologists, and they were asked this question while the convention was taking place. If you yourself had cancer, would you take your own treatments? Over 80% of them said they would not.
Wow.
So don't tell me that the doctors don't know. They know how deadly this stuff is, and they wouldn't take it themselves.
Yeah. Just give me a minute. I've got a siren passing here. Sorry, I live in a quite a busy city. That is incredible. Wow. Okay. I've had you on for quite a bit. I've got a few things I just wanted to ask you here. Let's talk about some of the other products that hemp actually makes.
oh God, it's endless. Over 50,000 different things, building materials. We could be living in hempcrete houses. We could be driving hemp cars, hemp boats, hemp airplanes. I mean, this stuff is extremely strong. And, like building supplies, fabrics, it just goes on and on and on. And, what people have to understand is that anything that can be produced from fossil fuels, like all these plastics we have today, they can also be produced from hemp in an earth-friendly way. And the plastics that you produce from hemp do not pollute the planet. They biodegrade and that's it. We're not left with all this pollution. But if we're using fossil fuels, we're left with the pollution. And if you look at the oceans and how much plastic is floating around in the oceans and around our shores, that'll give you a pretty good idea of the destruction that we're causing.
Sure. Yes, indeed. And it's all about Big Pharma making big money at the end of the day.
Well, I mean, why does anybody believe, like Nixon started the war on drugs, and of course now they got the war on terror, and in reality, the very countries like United States, England, Canada, and all the rest of them, I mean, what are our troops doing in Afghanistan guarding poppy fields? When the Taliban was there, they ripped up all the opium and replanted hemp. But when our brave soldiers went there, out come the hemp and in went the opium, where over 80% of the world's heroin supply comes from. But, they're not drug dealers. And wasn't it the CIA that is so famous for flying in all those plane loads of cocaine into the United States, and they got the United States addicted? The Central Intelligence Agency. That's a government. That's a branch of government. No, but they're not drug dealers. They'll put you and me in jail for growing a harmless, God-given plant while they're importing cocaine and heroin. And who's the criminals here?
Yeah.
It's so damn obvious. It's enough to make you sick. And I had to laugh here a while ago. I seen this thing about the American Coast Guard, and they're down there in the waters between Colombia and Central and South and North America, patrolling the waters, to keep the drug trade down. Well, maybe the Coast Guard should go to the CIA if they want to keep the drug trade down. It's so pathetic. And when I see this thing today, the war on terror, we're going to invade Iraq to bring freedom to the Iraqi people. So we go in there, we bomb them back to the Stone Age. We used weapons that the United Nations themselves said are a crime against humanity to use depleted uranium. They go over there and they use depleted uranium. They used it in the Balkans. These countries are polluted forever. And people are going to wind up with all these horrible diseases caused from this exposure. They're literally just destroying the damn planet. And, I have nothing against technology if it's used properly and with common sense. But this is what I see today. We have all these wonderful new technologies, but for the most part, they're not being used properly. They're being used against us. They're causing harm to humanity. And, anybody that can't see that, I really feel sorry for them because, when I was a child, these diseases you hear about today, like Alzheimer's, well, nobody heard of Alzheimer's in 1950s and 60s. Like I said, cancer itself was very, very rare. Another disease, Crohn's. Crohn's was something basically that was unheard of. Today, every second person got Crohn's, or they got,
Yeah.
And it's all to do with our food supplies, the genetic modification that they've been doing, especially here in North America. It's outrageous. The meat, even the meat here isn't safe to eat. It's all hormones, growth hormones, antibiotics, and you're eating all this trash. You can't sell meat that's produced in Canada or the U.S. You can't sell that in the EU. So what I've seen of the EU, or Europe itself, they've got their act together a whole lot better than we do over here. Because these factory farms that we have in the U.S. and Canada, they're poisoning the environment at a very alarming rate. And they have farms such as this in the EU, but they keep very tight controls on it. So the pollution is kept down, and it's much safer. I think Europe is actually setting a model for the rest of the world to follow, but all of these idiots in the U.S. and Canada, they're so headstrong, because we've been brainwashed into believing that we're the only ones that got it right. Those people in Europe, they don't know nothing, but we're so smart, we've got it all figured out. Well, we haven't got anything figured out. And I think Europe is very, very much advanced, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. Living here, I honestly can say that's not the truth. And a lot of Americans have that impression. I guess that grass always looks greener on the other side, but really, Europe is now the European Union. There's very little that defines the individual boundaries of countries other than perhaps their languages. But there's a whole other police sort of state kind of moving in here. Let me give you an example, Rick. You have to, by law in Holland, have health insurance. So you don't get government health insurance. You have to pay, for example, €200 a month to get health insurance. And if you do not have that health insurance, you cannot drive a car, nor can you get employed.
That's idiotic.
And just to give you an idea of how it works, and then health insurance doesn't cover marijuana; it only covers pharmaceutical drugs. I understand people think, and I'm saying this to you honestly because I don't want you to come over here and think it's going to be better. It's not. It's not good anywhere you go. It's the same control system no matter where you go.
Well, I know that, dear. I mean, it's just that I spent a lot of time in Europe over the last 3 years, and I found a sense of freedom in Europe that I never found here in Canada. I'm serious about this. The second night I was in the Czech Republic, I finished a seminar, and the people that were putting it on, they just told me after I was done, they said, well, go in that room. So I walked over, opened the door, walked into this room, and of course there's a cop standing there in uniform. And I looked at this guy, and I thought, okay, what's this? But he could speak English, and he came over, he shook my hand, and then he reached and he pulled a joint, out of his uniform, lit it up, and I'm standing there looking at this guy, and he passes me the joint, so I took a puff off it, and, I said, what do the police over here think about these laws? And he said, well, Rick, he said, a lot of us, that work in policing over here, he said, a lot of us smoke this plant ourselves. And we don't feel that we have the right to interfere with people, unless you're a big-time drug dealer and you're making all kinds of money or something. But he said, what harm is a guy smoking a joint doing?
Yeah.
And I shook his hand and I said, it's a pleasure to meet a real police officer.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. I guess in certain respects you will come across those wonderful things like that. But let me just tell you, it's not greener on the other side. Honestly, there's a lot of controls in Europe. I'm actually South African. I don't know if you know that, but I was born in South Africa and I grew up and lived there for 23 years. And I always thought that South Africa was a very free country because it is a lawless country in a way. You can pretty much get away with murder there if you've got enough money to pay off the right people. So in one way it is free, but that freedom comes at a very dark price as well because, as I say, people can get away with anything. So, yes, there is that control and stuff that comes with living in probably a first world Western country, that you don't feel that kind of freedom that perhaps you'd feel in a place like the Czech Republic or South Africa. But there also is the other element of there is that extreme darkness, which, if you've spent some time in Czech Republic, I'm sure you've seen the kind of poverty that they have there compared to Canada. I mean, you don't see anything quite so bad in Canada.
Oh, don't underestimate poverty in Canada. There's a great number of people living on the streets in this country, too.
Oh, terrible. And such a wealthy country as well.
Well, we should be the richest country in the world, but yet the streets are full of people that don't have jobs, they have no incomes, and they're living on the street.
Yeah.
But, I was very happy. I mean, when I went to the Czech Republic in 2009 to do this speaking tour, basically nobody in Europe knew anything about this oil.
Wow.
So, I pounded the drum and kept pounding the drum. Well, here just recently, the Czech Republic have actually legalized the medicinal use of this oil, and they intend to start using it in treating cancer.
That's fantastic.
So in
done.
3.5 years, I had an impact over there, and I'm very happy that the Czech Republic have seen the light. At least that gets us going in the right direction.
For sure.
And there's many other countries too, like Croatia. I've done a lot of work in Croatia. I've done The Edge of Science, that a very popular TV show there twice. I've spoke at the university in Zagreb. I've done seminars down in Opatija. I did 2 down there. And, the response from the people was actually overwhelming.
Fantastic.
And, so I do see it opening up. In Spain now, the compassion clubs in Spain, what you do behind closed doors is your own business.
Yeah.
So Spain isn't bothering people. Switzerland is moving in the direction of using this oil in a big way, too. Actually, I'm planning, I hope, sometime this summer, after I'm done in Europe, I'm planning to move on to South America, to Uruguay, because I found out here just recently that Uruguay has never had a law in place against cannabis. If I had known that 10 years ago, that's where I would have went.
Brilliant.
But I didn't know, and well, finally, the weird thing was with Uruguay is that here just a while ago, they introduced a law stating that anybody can grow 6 plants of their own, and that's the law they wanted to put in place. But the people in Uruguay actually voted against it, which I couldn't believe, and I thought, why would that be? And then I realized what was happening. See, Uruguay is just south of Brazil. Well, Brazil, they have the laws against cannabis. Uruguay did not. So I expect a lot of those farmers that were up there close to the border were making a very good living, shipping the pot into Brazil. And they didn't want that to end. So I think that's what the government did this for, just to end all of this drug trade. And from what I understand, Uruguay has one of the least corrupted governments on earth. So I think that there's a great deal of potential there.
Wow. Interesting. Now listen, when you come over to Europe, you let us know you're here, right? We would love to actually hook up with you.
Well, most people know where I'm at. I've never made any secret. I used to always laugh at people, like Rick Simpson is on the run, from the law. Well, that's nonsense. I mean, you got a passport. Every country you go in, they know where you're at. The Canadian government could have extradited me at any time, but they didn't want to extradite me because, it would cause more attention to be brought to this issue.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing now with me here in Canada. They're staying completely away from me because if they want to put me in a court, you go ahead. I'm the leader of the hemp movement now worldwide. This medicine has been recognized by millions worldwide. So if you want to see a real dog and pony show, put me in your damn court because none of their courts are real anyway. They're all de facto courts. We got to go back to the old common law system. That's the real system of justice. These de facto courts we have and this so-called law that they practice, it's just about money. It's not real law. And I mean, it's not just the doctors that are involved, it's the lawyers. I mean, I said this to a lawyer myself in Canada here. And I said, would I be wrong in thinking that half the lawyers in this country are making a living off of hemp charges? And, the lawyer just looked at me and he said, well, that wouldn't be far from the truth.
Yeah.
So they don't, they're all standing at the money trough and they don't want anybody to take it away.
Yeah, for sure.
They're all bought and paid for. I got to the point now that I used to respect, education. Now I have no respect for education. I think the longer you go to school, the stupider you get, or the more bought off you become. And I look at people now in suits and uniforms as just being parasites, that are inflicting a great deal of grief upon humanity. And when I look at these, police officers out there doing raids and things like that, I mean, my God, these people have their own loved ones and families and children that this medicine could help too. But yet they'll go out there and they'll deny it from you. I mean, this is truly sick. And it's the same thing with the military. The jarheads. Of course, you don't have to be too smart to become a police officer, or you don't have to be too smart to get in the military. But still, there are a good number of people within these organizations that do see the truth. So what I've said right along is I think the system will literally destroy itself from within. And this is what I'm seeing now, like you see like these Bilderberg meetings. Well, it's always reported beforehand who's going to attend. So people are starting to sell the system out. And, the faster we can get rid of this system, the better. Yeah. I honestly think we should do away completely with political parties. Get people, elect people from whatever region you live in, but make sure, that they're honest, they have a high moral standard, and they will represent the people properly. And the easiest way to make sure that they do is that they do everything with an open book policy. Nothing hidden from the public any longer. And as far as governments go, like here in Canada, we have Ottawa and their big fancy Capitol buildings and all that. Well, as far as I'm concerned, turn it into a museum. What we should do, because we make these people cabinet ministers and they don't know anything about what they're doing. So why don't we take, say, 2 of the smartest in fishery, 2 of the best in forestry, 2 of the best in medicine, and all these different fields. Take about 2 dozen people, put them in a think tank, let our local elected representatives report any serious problems to them, let the think tank run the country. Again, with an open book policy to the public.
Yeah.
And then we could get rid of all this damn corruption, and it would be a whole different world that we're living in.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Wow.
Well, another thing, too, I should mention, there's so many, like, I'm supposed to be the leader of the hemp movement after Jack Herera's death. Well, I was appointed by Jack, so I guess nobody's arguing with that. But, when you see the way that things are unfolding here right now, to me, it's not unfolding nearly fast enough. And, we need people to get up more quickly. I mean, if it was your child that was dying, or your mother or your father, my God, wouldn't you want them to have the right medicine that could save them? This is what this is all about. I'm not asking for anybody to give me, I wish the government would come along and give me a big pile of money so I could go do this properly. But I'm not asking people for anything. I'm just telling you how you can heal yourself and how you can help yourself. And when you look at today, there's so few people that have any self-reliance. If the grocery store closed, well, they've starved to death. Especially over here. Like Europe, you see a lot of gardens. I love the way they do things in Europe. But over here in North America, I mean, hardly anybody even grows a garden anymore. If the food supply or the economy collapsed, within 2 or 3 days, it would turn ugly very, very quick. And the EU is not really in much better condition, like money-wise, in North America, because there's been a lot of question about the euro too, and we all know, like, the American dollar. I mean, that hasn't been worth anything for decades. All they do when they want more money, they just print more.
Yep. Yes, indeed. Well, look, Rick, can you do me a favor? When you get over here, let us know you're here. We are dying to go see you, and thank you so much for all this wonderful information. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, it's like you said. To me, it's just that, look, this is our world. We all have to survive on this planet. I would like to see us getting along better. I'm a person that believes in no borders. If we could all travel freely, I think it would promote understanding, and we could learn to put an end to all these, trivial wars and all this nonsense. And I think we could do that quite easily. But as long as we're willing to live within these borders, we actually are imprisoning ourselves. So, I've always thought a bit more freely, I guess, than most people, but I think as a human being, we have the right to go anywhere on this earth if we want to live. Why shouldn't we? And it would be a better world, if we approached it in this way. But one of the main concerns I have right now is there's so many people out there in the hemp movement, or they call themselves activists, and they jump up and they say, well, marijuana has to be taxed and regulated. Well, I don't know what movement they're in, but they're not in the same movement that I'm the head of. I can tell you that for sure. Because, I just look at it and say, okay, we know what the Rockefellers, Rothschilds, and a whole bunch more of those banking families, we know what they've done. It's more than obvious. They're behind it all. So what I'm saying, take them into a common law court, make them admit their guilt, and then strip them of their money and resources. And then take this money and resources and put it in the hands of people that will help everyone on this planet. Not just one country or two countries. We need to help the whole world, every human being. And if we did that, I think, that the whole world would change very radically. As for these evil rich types, I look at these people as really, they are psychopaths, there's no question. But again, that's a medical condition. So, who knows, if we started giving these people some oil, that might clear their thinking a little bit, and they might become somewhat better. But I don't think that we should, seek retribution, because, in reality, we're all responsible. It's our own apathy that's allowed the world to become what it is today. So I would say, strip them of these resources and their money, but leave them enough so they can live out the rest of their lives, in some degree of comfort. They wouldn't fit in our world anyway, because none of these people actually have a head to go out and work for a living. So, keep them, give them enough money, or leave them with enough money that they can exist until they pass away. And, but as far as going out and taxing the cannabis hemp plant, I think that is totally ridiculous. Cannabis hemp never hurt no one. It is man's best friend. And why should we pay tax to the very governments that outlawed its use in the first place? I think we'd have to be a little bit silly to do that, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Craziness.
But I think in the near future, we are going to see many changes. And when this oil comes out and is starting to be used on a grand scale, it's just going to sweep this world in a tidal wave of healing, such as mankind has never seen before. And it does a bit more than just heal, because people Now, even pot smokers, like you have to look at this for what it is. We've always looked down our noses at people smoking pot, but actually, even smoking pot has to be considered medicinal. It's a form of preventative medicine because it's been proven over and over again that people who smoke marijuana have less chance of getting lung cancer, throat cancers, cancers of the brain, neck. You're preventing cancer. So how can anybody, when you're drinking alcohol or popping pills from the pharmaceutical industry, you're not preventing anything. You're causing problems. So even smoking cannabis, can only be looked at as being medicinal. But in my book, it is the least medicinal way to use this substance. You have to ingest the raw cannabinoids in the oil. That's when you see the real magic that this plant can work. And I think it's really a horror story that, we should have been using this oil for hundreds of years. Because we always knew how to produce it. And I've often said to people, I'm not a religious person, I'm spiritual. But if there was such a man named Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, healing the masses, well, guess what he was using? It certainly wasn't the healing power of God. He was using the healing power of hemp. The holy anointing oil, samples of that have been found and tested. It's full of cannabinoids. For thousands of years before Christ, this was recognized as the most medicinal plant on earth. So I think what happened, in the case of Christ, I think 200 or 300 years later, when they finally got around to writing their holy Bible, and I call it Bible on purpose because to me it's just nonsense. But when they got around to writing all of that, then they basically slid hemp out the back door, and then, Jesus used the power of God, and, and Jesus died for our sins. Well, that was 2,000 years ago. It don't seem to me like we've learned very much. We're still we're committing more sins now than we ever did. And I'll tell you another thing. If I was God, or if you were God, would you give your only begotten Son to die on a cross for the sins of mankind? I wouldn't even think about it. So to me, the whole premise of religion, it's all forms of control. And we lived with these forms of control for thousands of years. I mean, look at your Catholic Church, the Spanish Inquisition. If you got caught using hemp medicine, they'd burn you at the stake. But yet, as I understand it, right there in the Vatican, last fall, before I came back from Europe, we were contacted by a man who said he worked at the pharmacy in the Vatican. And he told us that hemp medicines are available in the Vatican for the Pope and all those top guys.
Wow.
What about the rest of us? It's just sickening.
Insane. Wow, that's insane. Wow. I can't believe it. So the Pope and them are using hemp medicines and having it manufactured for their own usage, but restricting it to humanity. Oh, it's insane.
Well, I asked, when Yendra gave me that report, I asked him, I said, check it, for God's sake, Yendra, check this out. As far as he could find out, it's true. And it really doesn't surprise me.
No, of course not. Yeah. Okay. All right, Rick. You've given me so much information. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, just that, it's our world, so, let's get together, work together, and we can make it so humanity, can fulfill, we're evolving all the time. So let's evolve into something better, and let's make this world a decent place to live. And we can deal with natural calamities, but we have to eliminate, the possibility of our own fellow man, wiping us out. And that could easily happen right now with all of these crazy things that they're doing. So I say use technology properly, use common sense with it, make things better for everyone, and for God's sakes, let's make that plant legal, completely legal. Decriminalization will not do.
For
sure. We need the cannabis hemp plant to be completely legal, the way it to grow any amount in your backyard. If you want to grow 1 million plants, I couldn't care less. Because when we set that plant free, we also set ourselves free.
Yeah, lovely. Brilliant way to end it. Rick Simpson, thank you ever so much for your time today. It has been a true honor and a privilege, and I'd love to speak to you again. I'm
sure we'll get together when I get back to Europe, dear.
I can't wait. Excellent. Look, I'll speak soon. Thanks for this interview, and I'll upload it. And sure, I'm just mind-boggled by all this information. Just when you think you know it all, really, this has been a truly amazing interview. So thanks again.
Could you please send me a link when you get ready to put it up? And
Yeah, of course.
Put it up on our site too.
Brilliant. I'll pop it on your Skype view, yeah?
Okay, that'd be fine, dear.
All right, lovely. Thanks, Rick. Take care.
Okay.
Cheers then. Bye-bye.